This is Pam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air for the first time with Reina Bach. Welcome to the Fam Electric Ghost podcast. How you doing tonight?
I'm really well, Phantom. So great to be here. Yeah,
I'll let
doing
people
super
know we
well.
are a featured podcast. Thank you. Um, yeah, just to let everybody know, we're a featured podcast on the Newsly platform. You can see the icon up there. And if you see the scrolling below, there's a coupon code. So you can check that out and listen for free on that platform. We are a featured podcast platform show on Newsly, and we will be on Newsly later tonight with the audio only version of this episode. What we want to also let people know who are just listening is we have Reina Bach's URL up. It's reinabach.com, and you'll be able to fully click on that and go to that when we're published on all the platforms. And today, this episode is actually episode 1019 of the Family Electric Ghost podcast, tracking on Apple Podcasts since 2016. And we're going to talk about this topic: what is joy and how is it different than happiness? And so, before we get into that, maybe you can give the folks a little bit about background about your life. I know you're an executive lifestyle coach, and you've been in leadership positions in the private sector, but maybe you want to give a little bit of background to the
Yeah,
audience.
sure. I've been doing people and leadership development for about actually over 30 years. And I've worked in private sector, a lot in the high tech industry, as well as the financial industry. And I've done some work with the federal government. And so, yeah, that's what I do. It took me a while to kind of find my swim lane with my work and my career. And I just love it. I love helping people find their what makes them tick, their purpose in life, to bring them joy and fulfillment. Yeah.
That's interesting because I'm a podcast host and I'm a musician, but my day job is I'm a software developer. I'm a software
Oh.
person, and I work in consulting. So it affords all my toys. Because as a musician, I want to buy my keyboards and my guitars and all that. But I found a way to kind of be creative with both the left and right side of my brain. The thing I did that changed like 5 years ago is I got off the road. I was a road warrior. I was always
Oh, wow.
going on planes from like Sunday to Thursday. And I said, well, you know what? I can't do my music. I can't do podcasting. I can't do the stuff I want to do. If I'm not in the airport, I'm not in Uber, or not on the plane, then I actually have time to do the things I really love. So I found a way to balance my life with my art and responsibilities and be able to not be a starving artist, but be able to
Mm,
do it the way I want.
yeah.
So I think it's like trying to find joy and happiness is I think you have to find that balance. Like if you find out you're doing too much and it's not making you happy, right? And you're actually
Yeah.
satisfying somebody else, but you're not satisfying yourself. Like, is that really what you want to do?
Yeah, and I really commend you, Phantom, for creating that um, something that really works for you, because you can pay the bills and more and buy the equipment and keep up your artistry as a musician. And um, a lot of people struggle with that because they tend to stay in a world of, here's what I'm good at and here's what I should do. So it's either the combo and or one or the other, and so they kind of they forget about what used to bring them joy, make their heart sing when they were younger, right? And so you found a way to do it. So
It's that creative spark, because I find like in information technology, there's a lot of creative people. We come up with AI, we came up with all these ideas. There's like video games. There's a lot of stuff we build that doesn't exist, right? We come up with
yeah,
ideas that are very kind of fanciful, and so we're
yeah,
always relearning. We're always, it changes. Like what you knew 5 years ago is not what you know today. In six
yeah,
months is what I know. I need to know something else, and so you
yeah,
have to kind of be a student. Some
yeah,
people don't want to be in a career where they have to be a student for their whole career. They
yeah.
kind of want to know that it's going to be this and I'm going to be able to repeat it. And I don't got to really stretch myself and kind of push myself into something I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and some people are just wired that way, and that's great. And then people like you and I, we're wired a little bit differently, and it's that continual learning, the juice of almost having to learn, right? For you, staying up as a software developer, and keeping that part of yourself filled, because it's a job that doesn't stay still, right? You are
Yeah.
always evolving as a human in the work you do.
Yeah, that's kind of hard because a lot of people want to know,
Yeah.
when I become a consultant, it's like that 9 to 5. Well, there's not exactly certainty. You could have downtime. You could have
Oh
a
yeah.
project over, then you got to get the next project. There could be a period of time where you're not working. And so,
Yeah.
but I tend to be in a situation where I'm more optimistic, because once you have a rep, then that goes away because people come to you. You have to like reject projects. So
Yeah.
like basically you start to get enough of a name recognition in your field, and then you can say what you want to work on and what you don't want to work on. And when you're
Hmm.
ready for the next thing, I got people prepped to know when I'm ready to roll off and then go to the next thing. And so it's not like the 9 to 5 certainty. And some people can't deal with that. They got to know that, hey, I'm going
Yeah.
to be here. I'm going to be in this place, and it's going to be this routine because that makes them feel comfortable.
Yeah. And I have a good friend who's like that, where she likes everything that's predictable, down to what time she gets up in the morning and what her day looks like, and she finds comfort, like you said, comfort in that, um, and that's great. By the way, I used to be a software developer my first year out of college, long time ago. Yeah. So, but I think that's, yeah, you're really, some people don't like that, some do, right? And you kind of have to go. I always encourage people to push their boundaries of comfort, and
Mhm.
even if it's something small, right? There's an analogy that I use, and for some people, making those little changes to expand their comfort zone, it's kind of like moving around a Rubik's
Rubik's
cube.
cube.
You're kind of
Yeah.
tweaking it just a little bit. And then for some
Yeah.
people who like to do a full on change of life, which I've done 3 times, it's the etch a sketch, right? This little thing, you're drawing life for a
Mm.
little while, you turn it around, and ooh, I'm going to start over again with a
Gone.
blank
Yeah,
slate.
start
So,
all over again. Yeah.
yeah.
It's kind of like when we're a musician, I have a tool, called an analog modular set. And it's kind of
Oh,
like a telephone operator back in the old days where there's wires, and you can remap the whole instrument. And so to
wow.
create any tone that you create, you have to take the wires and plug them into different sockets. And it's not digital, so it doesn't remember anything. It only remembers what you plugged in settings that you set. So it's like point in time. So in order
Wow.
to ever recall that, you have to take a snapshot of it and kind of
Hmm.
rebuild it like a Lego set, right? And
Wow.
then once you wipe it out, it's gone. And then
Wow.
when you wipe that out, you have to start all over again from scratch and build your tone from scratch. And
Hmm.
I like it because it drives me into places I don't know where I'm going. I have no idea
Mm,
where it's going to come out. And I
mm,
find that to be very inspiring, because a lot of people like to just clone what exists. But if you do something where you're going to go where you might have an idea that a square wave makes it sound like a bass, and a triangle
hmm,
sounds like a bell. But what
hmm,
type of bell? And if you start to
mm,
merge things or invert things, it goes kind of weird. And so
hmm.
when you get into sound design, which I do as a hobby, as a
Wow.
musician, it always has this kind of different outcome. And I can have a framework, but I can
Hmm.
go and reject the framework by going and doing something that kind of breaks the rules.
Hmm.
I can invert something or reverse something or do negative polarity. There's all kinds of weird things you can do with engineering and electricity and waves. And I
Wow.
find that that's kind of like in life, the happy accident, or you go to do a speech, right? And you have a set thing you're going to say, but then you read the
Hmm.
room and
Hmm.
you heard what the other people were saying that came on before you. And you say, well, what I was going to say doesn't really match the mood of what's going on right now.
Yeah.
So then you make that adjustment in real time. And you live in the present moment, and you don't just stay to the plan, you adjust to like the now.
Mm. Well, you know what I think under that tells me, Phantom, is that you trust. You trust yourself, you trust the outcome, and that speaker, right? Trust the outcome, trust him or herself, right? To be able to say, yes, I've got this, and I'm going to live in the moment. I'm going to do it and just stay here versus having everything planned out and sticking to the script, because you miss opportunities that are there, but you just pass them by because you're so tied to a swim lane, a script, right?
Hmm.
So, yeah.
That's what I find is happiness for me is living on that kind of um, bleeding edge that makes me forces me to be a little to be uncomfortable, sir, to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm,
But then
mm-hmm,
you trust the muse, you trust that you're a creative type of person, whether I'm doing software design or music or art, that I
mm-hmm.
trust that I'm going to take what I've done in the past and be able to take the input of right now and come up with something.
Yeah.
And I don't, I have, I just, you kind of trust in yourself that you can be in that present moment and the happy accident is actually worthwhile.
Mm.
That it's not something that you throw away. That I put a lot of happy accidents into the world,
Yeah.
and I'm
Of
like,
course.
and some people they do that and they just put it on the shelf and they never put it in front of anybody. And I've run
Yeah.
into tons of artists like paintings all over the room. Did you put any of these in the gallery? And it's like, no, I'm not ready. I'm like, it looks ready to me.
Yeah. Like, you brought up some really good points there. And one is the present moment, and the other one is the inner critic, right? And so I call that, like, for me, staying in the moment. It's the moments in the midst, right? Trying to stay present in the moment in the midst of everything that's going on. And so that's real, where I think real creativity lies, and the real juice in our lives exists, and the joy exists living in that present moment. Yes, we have to plan, we have to do lots of different things, but um, if we can spend more time living in the moment, right, that is really, really key. The other thing you said is the talking about those artists who have art on the walls and uh, who haven't introduced it, haven't brought it out to the world. It's not ready yet, right? So possibly, typically, in my experience, is it says they've got an inner critic voice that's louder and more active and getting in the way of them actually saying, you know what, here it is. It's good enough, right? When
Hmm.
is good? When is good enough good enough, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've run into people being a producer, and I run into like a young artist, and they try to show me either something where they're trying to impress me that they can match like what's in the top 40, or they're trying to show me that they know my work and they try to match something I already wrote. I said, well,
Mm,
that already exists. I did it already, and this thing already exists because they did it already. What I want to
mm.
hear is a song that you're scared to show anybody, because
Ooh.
that's going to show me something that's worthwhile. Because I think what's important to me is finding the individual voice of the songwriter or the artist and making that work by making it sound
Mm.
better, bringing out things that maybe they didn't know were there, but not radically changing it and trying to turn it into a ghost production. Well, I already have ghost productions. I already have stuff that I wrote. I don't need to make
Mhm.
it sound like me. I'd
Yeah.
rather make it sound like them.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody's heard them. And that's why I want to work on it, because I think that's
Mhm.
what's important. And there's people who don't do that. People who just want to clone and copy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'd rather just accentuate the individual that is them.
Yeah. I you're preaching to the choir. I mean, I love that you encourage your artists to find their inner voice and be and live their inner voice, right? And so there is uh we all have something to give in this world. We all have a unique set of gifts and talents. And for some reason, it playing the safe rate safe route and going with something that's already been done, or riffing off of what's already been done, right? Putting something out there that is new and interesting and innovative, or not, right? But it's you, right? It's the artist, right? Putting it out there and having frankly the courage to put it out there. So how do people respond when you tell them to give you something that they're afraid to show anybody?
Well, some people get really excited because most producers don't do that. Most producers tend to want you to clone something they've already done, because they go on the algorithm and think that's got 1 million listens, and so we got to clone that. So they tend to just repeat their work and do it in kind of sneaky ways, by just changing something about it, but it's still kind of in the same ballpark. And it's kind of like, okay, well, people get to accept that. And then you hear a lot of stuff that sounds the same. It's like, why does that all sound the same? Because everybody's staying safe. It's once in a while you get the Dylan, you get the Lou Reed, you get a Freddie Merck, you get somebody that's individual. And it's like, wow, why are they so different? Because they had the courage to kind of push it, like Hendrix. I mean, Hendrix is one of my, famous, because he went to the studios and he did stuff, and the engineers told him, like, you can't put that on record. That's feedback. You can't do the stuff you're doing. It's too loud. And he forced it. He said, that's the way it's going. And sometimes he actually went on the mixing board and did it himself to make sure it came out what he heard. And so that's when you have somebody that's dedicated and believes what they're doing, and nobody else was doing it. So how do you get to that point? You get to that point where you feel that it should exist.
Yeah.
And that's where you try to get the people to kind of build that courage. It's like, people should hear me.
Yeah.
People should, and then you build up that, once you build that confidence, and people get like unstoppable. Because a lot of it's just like, it's mindset. You jump on that stage and you believe it. It's the law of attraction. Then the crowd believes it. Then you start building and building. It's like, how does that happen? Because people start to believe in you because you believe in yourself.
Yeah. It's amazing how that happens when you start believing yourself, and how you show up in the world and how people react to that. If you just own it, right? People just own it. This is who I am. This is the kind of music
you got to own it.
Yeah. Right? Really stand in it.
It's hard to be vulnerable. It's hard to be vulnerable because people will attack you. Like when you're original, people will say that's garbage. People will personally attack you. And that's the hard part. And so many people, they can't stand that initial barrage of negative feedback, which, it seems like a lot of times that initial negative feedback comes in, it's not very constructive, and it shoots down the person, and they don't have enough of a fortitude to go beyond it. And so then they can't get past it. It's that next person who actually gets hit with that and it says, hey, I'm not stopping. That's what's hard. That's the hard thing, because a lot of times, failure as an artist is like, that's like 99% of what's going on. It's like most of the time your pieces don't work, right? It's once in a while they work.
Yeah.
And so if you gave up on the first 100 things, like it's 101 is the one that goes through. Like if you give up before 101, then no one's ever going to see you.
Yeah. Just don't give up, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is that people, it's not an overnight process. I've been writing since I was 17, and I've had like a lot of things that didn't work and things that have worked. And, I have a lot of friends that stopped when they were 22, 23, 24. And, they're so surprised that I'm still going, because I did it because I like it. I like playing the keys, right? It doesn't matter if anybody likes it. I like playing the keys. So I'm not going to stop because I like to do it. Like if you were doing it for some other reason other than you love music, then a lot of times there'll be enough reasons for you to stop. You have to decide what is the purpose and why are you doing what you're doing.
And I think you really hit on something, and that is, who do you do it for, right? Who are you doing this for? Are you doing for yourself or somebody else? And talk about talk about joy, right? And So if you do something because you enjoy it, then it's going to have some shelf life, right? I mean, look at you. You've been doing it for a while and other people left. And yes, there are some realities relative to, yes, I have to pay the bills and I've got to manage life and fit this in. But you've done that, Phantom, which is really incredible. Super incredible. But I was going to say, going back to the distinction that in my mind between joy and happiness is if you, well, I did some research with Colorado State University a number of years ago, a couple of their PhD students, and we looked at really from a workplace perspective, looking at joy, and it was incredible. When we started doing some research to figure out how is joy defined, it was pretty much all over the map, right? You would find contradictory definitions of what joy is, and a lot of times joy would show up in search engines relative to spiritual, right? So it's something with the spirit, something with religion, but more spiritual, right? And it shows up in different religions, right? And so, I mean, for me, I think it is spirit, right? But how bringing it down into what is joy like every day? And I remember years ago, Phantom, 20 years ago, somebody asked me, he said, Reina, what brings you joy? And I couldn't answer the question. I thought, I'm like, it took me a week to actually think about what brought me joy. I know, weird, right? Because some people know exactly what brings them joy now. And, but for me, I had to go back and figure it out. And, I could answer that, right? I could answer his question now, but more importantly, that for me, the distinction between joy and happiness is comes to a personal events, right? It's something out in the world that makes us happy, right? An experience, a person, an event, getting married or whatever that might be, or getting divorced. So it could be something like that might bring some joy. Happiness. But for me, joy is more of a well within. And it's a place, Phantom, that we cultivate over time. Kids are born with this, right? Because it's that place. What's that?
They don't overthink it. They just experience it. They have it until somebody tells them they shouldn't have it.
Yeah, exactly. Not too many candy bars. But in my experience, it really is that the reservoir that is in our hearts, in our souls, in our bodies, that regardless of what's happening out here, we can tap into this. And it's a reservoir that we can go to and find. And there are definitely ways to cultivate it. And I have certain ways that I help my clients, but kind of tapping into that, so that, hey, if you lose your job or this or that, or something's going on out in the world that is could be super upsetting, it's that place within that you can tap into and recenter and find that inner calm, the inner peace, to be able to, I still have that regardless, right? So that's how I just.
Well, it seems like, when I've talked to creative people, it's kind of like when you're in the pocket, or you're in the flow state. Like I've talked to like authors, and they might be world building, they might be doing character design, but when they sit at their typewriter and they just go into a flow state and they write a whole chapter they didn't expect they were going to write, it just comes out. It kind of comes from the muse, and it's really that trust in yourself. It's kind of say if I'm playing jazz fusion with a group, and we have a set piece, but we kind of go into this flow state, and we just kind of go in that moment. And it's not, we kind of know how to read each other, and we're not even saying anything. We kind of just nodding and nonverbal communication. It's like you kind of are in a trance. If you're in that creative moment, the moment of that creation, whether you're a painter, an actor, method actor, musician, poet, on stage doing a poetry jam, just making poetry at the moment.
Mm.
That to me is like that's what I find joy is, and then that moment of creating that thing, and I'm in this kind of trance state. And if you ask me like, well, how did that happen? I said, well, I just let it happen.
Yeah. Yeah. You weren't fighting it. You went with it. And
Yeah.
you're smiling now, just thinking about it.
Yeah, that always makes me happy, and I've always been able to, do it to a point where I have my studio is in my room.
Mm.
All my gear is in my bedroom studio. I'm a bedroom producer, literally, because the stuff's right here. So if I
Yeah.
just at any time I can do it. I don't have to go to the studio. And I know some artists that like they have to physically go to a separate place to create their work, but I can do it pretty much here.
Yeah.
I can go somewhere else too, but I can all and because I like to create so much, I just do it all the time because it's just
Wow.
part of my normal way of doing things. Like part of my daily process is to put things down.
Yeah.
Whether they're going to go anywhere or not, I put them down. It's just kind
Yeah.
of like journaling.
Yeah.
It's like how I treat it.
Well, you know what's interesting? I've heard from a number of artists that um, being in that flow, it actually brings in more, right? Because you've said yes, right? Your whole being says yes to the flow, and so you're getting all of it, right? Versus, and it's not good or bad if somebody has an external studio for creating music, producing music or art or whatever, or even writing, right? um but you're somehow you've just said yes to the flow. And so do you ever wake up in the middle of the night and hit your studio?
Yeah, because it's right here. So I mean,
Wow.
sometimes
Yeah.
things come to artists as dreams. I've read a lot about some of my the heroes I love. The great artists I'm into, from
Mm.
Dylan to Morrison, Hendrix, all the Beatles, and they describe sometimes like as this kind of either a waking dream or a real dream where things just came to them,
Wow.
and then they just woke up and they put the recorder on, and I've got recorders. I just put them on, and boom, it will just take whatever idea I come up with, and I'll just put it down and go back to bed. But like and I have portable devices where I can just walk in the woods and I can do something like this. This thing can actually write a whole song, and it's this small.
Wow.
And
That's
so like I just
amazing.
found things because I'm just the type of person that like if I'm going somewhere and I get an idea, like I said, I can grab this thing and this thing can write a whole song. And they
Oh my
put
gosh.
headphones on and nobody even hear me doing it. I can write all the parts. And so there's a lot of tools today that allow people to be very creative anywhere they are.
Yeah.
And so like I can be on vacation, I could be on a train, I could be on a plane, I could still be doing something. And I
Wow.
could be sitting somewhere and still do just because like I say, yeah, I don't close it off.
Yeah.
And sometimes I do. And if I go mountain biking, I'm not writing a song. If I'm hiking
Mm.
or canoeing, I'm not writing a song. If I'm walking in the woods, I might be thinking about something, but I'm in that different state.
Yeah.
Like a lot of times, what I think is that creative people have to do, and I'm a Buddhist, is I chant, I meditate, I find the
Mm.
quiet, and before anything ever gets created, usually in the quiet moment where you get the noise out
Mm.
and you just let things be, and you just go for like silence or just kind of peace, then
Mm.
things come. So
Yeah.
sometimes it's too noisy and you've got to close it off. At
Mhm.
other times, then it will redirect. And so it's not like it's on all the time, but
Mhm.
sometimes you have to learn like when to listen and when not to.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, um, yeah, it's being able to kind of give permission, but also say, "Hey, I've got something I have to take care of here," right? Yeah, yeah. Wow,
Yeah,
that
there's
is
other things in life you have to do.
yeah, yeah. I gotta drive somewhere. Yeah. Um, well, that's really cool. I think that just I mean, one of the things you mentioned, even like wherever you are, right? You're allowing this to come forth. And that really is I'm gonna botch his name, but Csikszentmihalyi talks about he wrote a book on flow state, right?
Mm,
it's that place where you're so in the moment that you're just so like one with your activity. And for you, it's this creating music, right? And just being in that flow state where I don't know about you, but there are some things that I do when I'm in the flow state, like creating jewelry, making jewelry, or
Hmm.
cooking.
Yeah, cooking. I like cooking too. I like
Yeah,
baking. I like
yeah.
cooking. I like
What do
to
you
be
like?
creative with
What do you
it.
like to bake?
Well, I know I can make like buckwheat pancakes and buckwheat cookies and organic type of cookies made with different type of flours, like almond flours and different things
Oh
to
yeah.
create different. Most people just make a standard cookie, but if you take buckwheat or take almond flour or take tapioca flour, you can do other things. So I
Oh yeah.
started because I'm a diabetic, and I started learning how to use different types of flours to make things that are less glycemic but still taste good,
Mm,
and
yeah.
use like not using dairy, using like different types of almond butters and different butters, coconut oils, and figuring
Mm,
out how to cook so I wouldn't trigger my type 2 diabetes. But
yeah.
I kind of take it as a creative thing. I'll look at a recipe and say, well, what happens if I take this recipe? And then I've been cooking since I was 17 too, because my mom taught me. And
Oh,
I
good
said, well,
mom.
you just kind of like, if any good cook takes existing recipes and then alters them based on their own taste or what they
Yeah.
choose to do. So I kind of do that. And sometimes
Mm,
I'll go and I'll experiment with different things.
mm,
And I find it like it's very similar. Like I do some video work and some artwork too. And I'm not the best artist, but I try to make the artwork as a whole picture. Like if you're doing music, like if you create some visual to go with it, from the
mm-hmm.
graphic art to the visual, video
Mm,
art, then it creates a whole piece. And so a lot of
yeah.
times my projects are not just limited to the audio; there's some graphics and some video that go with it. And so that gives
Mm,
me like a full expansive experience. I call it expansive sound. That's the genre I'm in. That mixes
mm,
multiple forms from punk to fusion to jazz to classical to psychedelic rock. It's like you can mix different genres in the same piece. And it's kind of
oh,
like what
so
progressive
cool.
rockers did, like Yes and Genesis and people like that. But it's like, a lot of times people today want to stay in one lane, say, oh, it's EDM, or it's trap, or I see a lot of people want to be so tied. And I said, well, what about like progressive experimental, which means I can cross multiple genres. Part of it
Mm,
could be bebop, part of it could be punk, part of it could be classical inspired with movements. And so why not?
mm.
Like a lot of people so want to control the frame, and I'm like, why not have a very wide frame and let more things come in?
Yeah. I wonder, I mean, you've been in this industry for a long time. Is that an industry thing? Because maybe they're thinking about how am I going to be able to sell this, right? So it
Yeah,
has
A and
to
R
fit
likes
in.
to sell. They
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
easier for them to say it's EDM. It's easier for them to say it's hip hop, to say it's rock, to say it's soul, than to say I don't know what it is. And then
yeah,
that you get guys like Prince that used to be able to push it. Like in the same album, he'd have 10 different genres. He'd have they nothing would sound the same. And
yeah.
I was a big fan of him because he was one of the biggest popular artists to actually be an experimental artist and be popular. The other guy that
Mm,
was like that was Bowie.
mm,
Bowie used to force it, and
mm.
people would deal with it. He would have
Yeah.
an image like when he created um, the whole idea of when he first came out, and he had that whole image of he was like the space alien, right? And he can like
Mm,
Ziggy Stardust, and he
mm,
could have milked Ziggy Stardust for the whole decade. He didn't do it. He's
mm,
immediate switch to Lad and Insane, and he switched to Thin White Duke. He would change personas, and his A&R would get ticked off because he's like, suddenly you're doing rock, and then you go and do soul, and then you go do
mm.
this and do that. He would switch, and he didn't care. He's like, I don't care if it makes money or not. That's where I'm
Yeah,
going.
yeah,
And a lot of times people don't do that.
yeah. Well, um, how far along in his career? You said he could have held on to um, is it Ziggy for
Well,
like 10
Ziggy is
years?
what kind
But
of, yeah, well, Ziggy
yeah, they were,
broke him. I mean,
yeah.
Ziggy, that's what, he had come out as David Jones. That was his original persona, was him. That was his real name. And then it
Oh,
didn't work. He was kind of doing like this
uh-huh.
Beatles stuff, and I've got copies of it, and it's really good. It sounds kind
Wow.
of like Beatles stuff. And
Yeah.
then it's like it wasn't working.
Yeah.
And then he did, a Space Oddity, and then that kind of worked. And it was kind of like pre-Ziggy, and then he suddenly went totally into Ziggy. And the Ziggy thing
Mm,
was very theatrical. And he came up with
mm,
this whole image of it. It was very androgynous. It was cutting edge. It was kind of jumping into places that nobody had been. It was jumping into new wave
yeah.
25 years before new wave.
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
he and he and so he went into something that was cross genre. It was blues, rock, psychedelia, theatrical stuff. And it
Mm,
was like it was like a lot of stage presence, a lot of
mm,
theater. A lot of what
mm.
Bowie does is theater, kind of like Freddie Mercury. It's all theater on
Yeah.
top
Yeah.
of musicianship, and
Yeah.
it was merging multiple forms. And
Yeah.
how you dressed and how you presented yourself was like theater. He's putting on like a stage play that's music, and people
Mm,
started to get that,
yeah.
and that's where he was. And
Yeah.
that when he could have kept that because it was making a lot of money, but then he
Mm-hmm.
decided to switch, and he started working with Luther Vandross and did this like other album that had like soul tinge to it, which is what
Mm,
wasn't what he was doing.
yeah.
But he was still able to kind of make it happen because he's a very kind of experimental artist that would go where he felt like going.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, he trusted that, kind of going back to that, um, uh, that trust. I mean, he already had a career, right, that he created, but still, even from the start, right, he kept, this is one of the things that, I work with my clients is how can you develop this feedback between you and the world, right? Because he was trying things and he said, yeah, this works and it feels good and I enjoy it. But then it's like, no, I want to try something else. And so he's just kind of going with the flow and interacting, right, with himself and the world and kind of just going with what's coming from within and who he needed to evolve into and become, right? Because
Yeah.
so many how many people do you know? I know a few. I am not one of those. I've had, I don't know, probably many different career lives myself, but there are people out there who say, I years ago, I want to stay with this company. I'm going to stay with this company, get a job and retire from this company. All right.
Hmm.
Then there are, some people who kind of switch jobs a little bit, right? And but there are some people who say, yes, this is what I want to do. And some people just switch careers and that's okay. Right. So going back to how does it feel on the inside? Does this match? Does it feel good? And then having the guts and the to be able to make those shifts. And Bowie did, right? He was listening to his inner guidance and having some fun with it, I'm sure, right?
Yeah, because I mean, what would happen is like, you go from like in the record industry, you have something that sells like 5 million records. Then you do the next thing, it drops to a million. Then the company says you fail because the
Yeah.
company bases your performance on the thing that you
Sales.
made the most money.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
so that what ends up happening is like he didn't really commercially succeed again until he did Let's Dance, which was like in
Mm,
the 80s. Like
yeah.
it kind of finally hit kind of the Ziggy kind of numbers. And
Mhm, mhm.
people say, well, he's not ever going to ever hit that again because Ziggy is zenith. And then he did. And then they were all surprised, like, because he was like, he didn't really, like, what they didn't understand is like he was doing the art for the art. And if it happened to bring the audience along, that's all gravy. But
Yeah,
he wasn't one of these guys that's in the number. There's some
yeah,
artists they chase the number and they kind of repackage the same thing over and over to hit that number. And there's
yeah,
other artists that do it because they like playing. They
yeah,
like they like pushing the envelope. They
yeah,
like try and reinvent themselves.
yeah,
And when you do that, the audience sometimes you get a different audience.
yeah,
You get an audience
yeah.
that likes your zenith moment and they don't like the other moments. So you
Mhm.
get, they all stay with you. And
Yeah,
authors find that because some authors write romance and they want to write a murder mystery and then they want to write nonfiction. Sometimes they'll use a pseudonym because that audience won't follow them. So they got to
Yeah.
create a different
Yeah.
character of themselves, and people don't even know it's them.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It is interesting. And, to be able to say, yes, this is who I am, and I'm just going to go for it and do it and be it. And, um, I think, regardless of politics, right? I spent a little bit of time in France, and one of the things that I love about the French, I used to date a French artist, and
Mm,
I lived in Paris, and one of the things that I love about that culture is, number one, they celebrate life's smaller moments, right? So
hmm.
talking about like, okay, we're going to make you not just coffee out of a Mr. Coffee. I have one of those, but we're going to make you a beautiful cappuccino and draw something on the top, right? And just those
Yeah, the
little,
right
sitting at a
little
cafe,
things.
right? Yeah.
Yeah,
And the other thing that I really love about the French culture, besides their food and wine, is they put artists on the same caliber as other professionals, right?
yeah, yeah.
So,
We tend not to do
so yeah,
that.
right. Doctors, attorney, like all the other people, like they put them on the same level. That was my experience when I was there and almost moved
Yeah,
there. So they have such an appreciation for art and for beauty, and not that we don't, right, as Americans, but that was something I added to my playbook, and I thought, wow, that's really cool. So going back to kind of chasing the numbers as artists, wouldn't it be great if artists didn't have to do that? And
yeah. I
sometimes,
mean, that's the dream. That's
yeah,
the dream.
right,
And like sometimes you find that if you have to kind of go for an audience that's worldwide because like
yes,
within the
yeah,
Western dynamic, like a lot of my music, I let it hit the worldwide zone, and I
yeah,
find that like other areas, like I sometimes in Asia or sometimes in like South America or even the Middle East, I'll get people digging what I'm doing more
that's
than what is going on in the U.S.
yeah,
And that's why you kind of like you throw it at the wall, as an artist, because you don't know which region's going to dig what you're doing. Because
yeah,
sometimes you have a melody that triggers something in another culture and you didn't even know you hit it, right?
yeah.
You might have triggered a melody that triggers some Eastern appreciation
Hmm,
or
hmm.
some like appreciation from a different culture, a different, social background. So when they hear it, it rings true to them.
Yeah,
But where you are in your neck of the woods, like I live in New Hampshire, well, that doesn't ring true with anybody here, but it did with somebody else, right? So,
yeah, yeah,
so
yeah,
if I went by where I live, I probably wouldn't do what I'm doing.
yeah. You wouldn't be doing what you're doing. Um, well, something I hear in your words, Phantom, is you're resilient, right? You stay with it, and the other thing is you've got a positive outlook, right? I'm gonna throw it at the wall. If it sticks, great. If it doesn't, fine. But and sometimes it does. But you keep doing your thing, staying in the flow, staying positive, and not being tied to the outcome that you're having with your music, right? But it's great when it is really cool and people love it, right?
Yeah, but what I found also is like sometimes the numbers don't tell the whole story. And I'll give an example with this
Yeah.
podcast. One time, I had an episode, didn't have a massive amount of views, but one of the people that viewed it was a Grammy award winning producer. And then they contacted me, and then we ended up having two episodes with them on the air. And
Oh,
so it kind of proves sometimes like just because your show doesn't get, the biggest number doesn't mean it didn't have an impact. And it's
yeah.
kind of like this, a lot of times
Mm,
in music, sometimes there's this kind of, legendary band like, the Velvet Underground
mm,
was a very, Lou Reed.
mm,
When he created that band, nobody bought them. They were commercial failure.
yeah.
But the story is tons of producers and musicians bought those records. And when you get to like the 80s and 90s, you get bands like the Counting Crows and the Replacements and all these REM. name checking Lou Reed, saying that he was the inspiration for a whole generation of indie artists, from
Wow.
like all the grunge artists to
Hmm.
like the Replacements and the REM. They're all name checking Lou Reed and saying
Wow.
he was their inspiration, but he was not a commercial success with the work that inspired those people.
Yeah.
So that tells you that sometimes just because the number isn't the
Yeah.
value of the work.
Yeah. It is not the value. And going back to like the purpose, like why do you do what you do, right? Lou Reed did what he did because he loved it. And he happened to make a huge difference in the lives of so many people. So not just those artists, but everybody who listened to their music, right?
Yeah, and then later he got, Bowie picked up on his music. And that's kind of like when
I
Bowie
didn't know that.
started. Yeah, like what it's really interesting is like Bowie helped Lou have his big hit with Walk on a Wild Side. Bowie helped work on that production of that record. And
Wow.
Bowie, it has interviews where he said, Lou is my inspiration. And I was so kind of upset that the world didn't see him the way I saw him. There was this interview I saw where Bowie was saying, like, Lou Reed's my hero.
Yeah.
And when you're in the 70s, and I'm eating up all the Lou Reed stuff, and I'm telling everybody that this is the greatest stuff in the world. And then suddenly I get an opportunity to work with this guy that is my hero.
Oh,
So like Bowie was all kind of freaking out that he was working with his hero, and Lou was like, "Who's this guy?" and he's kind of like, and so he's doesn't know why Bowie's like falling all over himself. And he said, "Well, I'll let him." It's like he's whoever he's kind of hot today, so I'll let him do it. Like Bowie didn't, and Lou didn't really know why they were together. They kind of got thrown together,
wow.
and then he came up and worked on that hit, and then that's how Lou got bigger. And it was
Oh,
interesting because it was kind of like this guy heard him and made he was getting big, and then he made
yeah.
him big. He made
Yeah.
him bigger than he had ever been, and they
Wow.
kind of made him the household name, and everybody suddenly knew who he was.
Wow.
But it's
Yeah,
like that. That's a strange thing that happens.
I love that song. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, you never know. So if you close yourself off, right? y- You don't know what you're missing. And
Yeah,
so
Lou would have never had that opportunity if he had said, "Well, this isn't good enough."
yeah, right?
Then Bowie would have never found him, and then he would have never had his future success.
Mhm. Mhm.
Was driven by the fact that he put this kind of non-commercial stuff out, and then Bowie heard it, and then
Yeah.
Bowie kind of thought he was an icon. This guy's great, and then suddenly it made that happen. It kind of
Wow.
became self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. Oh, I love those stories. I love those stories. And you've had
That's
somebody,
why,
a grand, what's that?
yeah, I'm just saying that that's the kind of joy and happiness is like because somebody was willing, like the joy of just putting the work out there
Yeah.
without the
Yeah.
expectation that you're going to get big, that you
Yeah.
just felt it was important.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Blake did with his Songs of Innocence and Experience. He put them on metal plates. He's the
Mm,
one romantic poet, Victorian poet, that wasn't known in his era. Nobody knew who he was. He was found after he died because he put the Songs of an Innocence and Experience actually have artwork that goes with it
wow.
on metal etchings. Every single poem has a picture that's on a metal etching, and that's how they were found in like a farmhouse after he was gone.
Wow.
And then
That
he
is
was
incredible.
considered, yeah, to be one of the greatest Victorian poets, but he wasn't known in his era. He's known in our era.
Mm, mhm, mhm. That is wild. This whole conversation, Phantom, it makes me think like, um, how do people like, how do people feel that Joseph Campbell calls it the rapture of being alive, right? And how do they feel that? I mean, so music for you is one of those things, right? Cooking, right?
Yeah, and poetry,
Exploring and
poetry.
doing cooking, finding that flow state. And one of the things that I mean, I work with a lot of people who work in the corporate world and may or may not have any kind of side hustle hobbies going on, but accessing getting the access to joy through the senses, right? Helps
Mm-hmm.
people to get present in the moment, to be able to quiet that mind, right? To be able to really be fully present. And so, cooking, wine tasting, drawing, doing art, creating music. Yeah. What's your experience with, do you have anything else that kind of puts you in that kind of flow
Zone.
state, receptive state?
Well, I mean, I like to walk in nature because like nature is the cathedral. I think Longfellow or Hawthorne
Mm.
wrote that. But the idea of just going out in a walk in the pines. I live in New Hampshire, and I like to mountain bike.
Ah,
And I find that when I get into mountain biking, one thing about that, the thing about mountain biking, what happens is you get in this joy of being able to have the skill of being able to stay on the bike when you're going down a dry creek bed, right? So
wow.
you're coming up a creek bed, you're going down a creek bed, and being able to maneuver through things that people don't think you should be able to ride over, right?
Mm, mm.
And it becomes this thing where like you have all this noise in the world, but when you're on the bike, it's all about just staying on the bike, right? And
Yeah.
making sure that you can stay on it, you can climb the hill, you can come down the hill,
Yeah.
that you can make it through all the obstacles and you don't get kicked off.
Yeah.
And that becomes this kind of like joy in the fact that you have just gotten the skill to kind of be in that moment on that bike. And then you can't think about the corporate world. You can't think about your music. You can't think about anything else other than staying on the bike
Yeah.
and not getting thrown off.
Yeah. And you're not texting or doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Yeah, because like so you're not thinking about anything. You're just right there with your bike. You're one with your bike, one with the environment, and you're navigating that. Wow. I used to get that. I used to have a motorcycle a number of years ago. And yeah, I was like that on my bike, at least when started riding for a while, right? I mean, I wasn't anywhere else. And I think that's why I don't mountain bike, but I commend you, and it's beautiful up in New Hampshire. But right, something where you're doing something either because you have to focus, right? A surgeon maybe, but mountain biking, right? A motorcycle where you have to stay fully present or there are consequences, right? And then
Yeah.
doing activities, right? It's like, ooh, doing activities that actually bring you joy and you want to be fully present, and there aren't uh, huge implications, right? If you're making a loaf of bread or you're making your cookies, right? If you don't pay
Yeah.
attention to the oven, yeah, they're going to burn. You're not going to fall off and break a collarbone, right? So
Yeah. It's a different thing. It's like there's
yeah,
one of them's a higher risk, It's like
yeah,
if you're out there, on a motorcycle or a snowmobile or you're downhill skiing, you've got to be focused in that moment. It kind of becomes this like zone. You're in
yeah,
that zone and you have to be aware of your
yeah.
surroundings and aware of what you can't zone out. Like I could be
Mhm.
zoning out when I bake, get distracted, burn the whole batch, forget to
Make
put the
another one. Yeah,
sugar. Yeah, it comes out too salty. Whatever. It's like, oh, well, that's not a big end of the world.
yeah.
But when you're biking or motorcycling or you're jet skiing, it's like if you don't do it right, like you wipe out. So you wipe
Hmm.
out. The consequence to wiping out.
Yeah, yeah. You got some big impact there. Um, yeah, I think that uh, the people can access joy. One of the big things is, in my experience, Phantom, is giving themselves permission, right? It's like you
Yeah,
give yourself permission daily, right? Because you have your studio right here. So you give yourself permission. It's baked into your life. And so, but so many people, a lot of people can't answer that question, what brings them joy, right? And so again, the reservoir here for me is what I help people bolster. But really being able to answer the question, what brings you joy, and then also how do you, even if you know what brings you joy and you're not doing those things or experiencing those things, like what can you do to access that, right? So that's a big thing that I think our culture certainly seems to struggle with, in my experience. So
yeah. A lot of
yeah,
people like they kind of numb their joy by doing things that actually don't really bring them joy. Like a lot of times
yeah,
it's numbing agents, and they
yep,
think that's joy, but they're
yeah,
basically trying to stop from feeling.
Yep.
because they've been
Absolutely.
disappointed. And so they're not
Absolutely.
embracing feeling, right?
Yeah.
And whether
Yeah.
they're using like a addiction or a substance addiction or
Shopping,
gambling addiction, it's they're trying to like get away from the real
feeling.
problem.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're not looking in what the poets used to call the looking glass, right? And
Mm.
actually seeing that other you. You know,
Yeah.
a lot of what I love
Yeah.
about the Victorian poets is that's what they challenge themselves in a lot of their work is in that
Mm.
looking glass, what is going on?
Yeah.
And then those pieces, a lot of them are about how you resolve that other you and how
Mhm.
do you
Mhm.
handle the feelings that that other you is
Yeah.
bringing, and they realize that that is you, and
Yeah.
actually address
Yeah.
what that issue is.
Yeah. And those feelings, I mean, those feelings really do range in my experience. They can be, um, there can be some anger and rage. There can be some shame, there, for picking a life and living a life that doesn't really resonate, right? It could be even like under those layers, right? It could be some sadness, right? Of gosh, or grieving. Like I always love to do that, and why am I not doing that anymore? And so there's some sadness. So really coming to terms with the emotions is huge, huge.
That's
Yeah.
what I love about songwriting is I can address, and it's a very cathartic for me because then
Mm.
I can address head on like a melancholy moment or a tragic moment or painful moment, whether it's me or something I read in the news. So a lot of times artists like
Mm.
we can take our own experiences and turn them into a piece, or I can read about something that happened to somebody else and turn that into a piece because you have this
Yeah.
empathy. So
Yeah.
you can take a lot of stories that resonate with you or stories that are your story and then kind of change it around. But
Mm.
the fact is you can take those feelings and turn them into a piece.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whether what type of artist, and I think that's what everybody does. And like even when I've met like therapists and life coaches, their creative capability is to listen to somebody,
Mm.
listen to their unique story, and then apply the right
Mm.
right like therapies or the right tool
Mhm.
to actually help resolve that because they've lived through something similar and they can see the parallels and they can address, but they address based on that person's unique situation and they know how to read it. And
Yeah,
so that's just like the creative capability of a therapist.
yeah, I think it's interesting because, um, I think that, therapists, coaches, coaching it's not classical music, it's jazz. And so being able to, like
Mhm.
you said, right, before we got on, I may riff, I may go off and kind of talk a little bit more about where we're going. I may not stay on the script. And so that's the creative flow, right? That's conversation, that's creative flow. And again, I think for me, it giving oneself permission to be able to access those, acknowledge them, access them, and not be afraid of the feelings. Because guess what? Those feelings, if they're squashed long enough in somebody's life, they show up in your body, right? Your
Mhm.
body
You get
doesn't lie.
illness and all kinds of, yeah.
Some shows
If
up,
you don't, yeah, if you don't listen, then you get diseases. You get symptoms, you get failures in your systems. Like you start to have organ failures, you get all kinds of issues with arthritis and all kinds of other issues. Like so, people don't listen to their body because they're pushing things down, and then they end up with the physical ailments.
Yeah.
And you end up with mental ailments, and you end up with people
Yeah.
that kind of blow up at some inopportune moment because they never addressed till it gets to
Mm.
a critical mass, and then it goes. And
Yeah.
then you're walking bombs. He's like, you don't need to be a walking bomb.
Yeah. No, we don't need those. You know what I hear for you, fandom, again, is that you give your creativity a voice, right? You tell your own story. You also read something in the newspaper, and you can tell that story, right? So, but you give it a voice, which is
Yeah, I
really
think that's what
amazing.
I think all writers do that. Like whether
Yeah,
you're writing a movie or a novel or a short story or a poem, that our ability is to project
yeah,
sometimes what we know, and then we research and figure out like maybe something that we don't know, right? And then
hmm,
try to apply it, create somebody that's not you.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times it's not just all you. You have to build that novel, you build all those characters. They're not all you.
Yeah.
So you had to figure out how do I create somebody that's not me,
Yeah.
that's interesting, you
Yeah.
know. And so songwriters, we do that all the time too. So it's the same idea. It's the same kind of pull.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's just fun to me. It's just
Yeah.
fun to build those worlds and build what I call sound paintings, and or sound movies, or like
Wow.
they're basically these like soundscapes, and they really they're designed to draw you in, and then the audience kind of owns it. I put it out there,
Yeah.
and then they own it.
Yeah.
I had an
Yeah.
original idea, and then whoever hears it gets to interpret it.
Yeah. Oh, so sweet. Oh my gosh. It's so I could keep talking with you, Phantom. I know. I think we're
Yeah, I
approaching the end
think
of
I
your
actually went
show.
over. Yeah, I think my other guest might be waiting for me.
Oh my goodness. Oh my
They're waiting
goodness.
for me now, but so that's okay because I think they'll wait. But thank you again for being on the show. It always goes by so fast. Sometimes I forget, and I forgot my cue to like end a little earlier. But yeah, remember, I want the audience to click on ReinaBach.com and check that out. We're fully clickable. I do appreciate you were on the show tonight. Sorry we have to kind of end it now, but we do have another show coming up. But thank you again. I think we had a great conversation.
Yeah, Phantom, thank you so much. And I want to wish you happy holidays. If anybody is struggling with the holiday stress, I have a free webinar coming up on December 19th at noon Mountain Time called Reassess, Recalibrate, Revive.
Oh, great. I think everybody should check that out because the holidays, people get the holiday blues. So check it out.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Phantom, thank you so much. What a gift, what you do for the world. So thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
Have a good night.
I'm gonna say so long. Thank you.
Oh, I gotta go.